What is going on, chess YouTube? So in today's video, I want to show you a beautiful game played by the GOAT Magnus Carlsen against Jan-Krzysztof Duda in the semifinals of the 2024 World Blitz Championships. And here we go. In the game, Magnus opens 1e4, Jan goes 1c5, the Sicilian defense. And now here, instead of knight f3 heading for d4, that is the main line of the Sicilian. Here, white does go c3, heading for the Alapin variation of the Sicilian. And not a bad choice in a blitz game at all. All right, Jan-Krzysztof Duda goes knight f6, challenging that pawn on e4. This is one of the main lines, along with d5 breaking in the center. Now, of course, white is going to go e5. There's simply no good way to defend the pawn if you want to go, say, I don't know, d3 or bishop d3. Black gets very easy quality. So e5 hits the knight, then knight d5 is the move. Then we have knight f3, and here the main line for black starts with the move knight to c6, developing the knight and putting pressure on that pawn on e5 right away. Instead here, Jan does go e6, and I have looked at this line quite a bit from black's perspective, and I gotta say, I am not a huge fan of it at all. It always felt very passive to me, but let's wait and see what Jan-Krzysztof Duda has in mind. All right, now here, d4 is the move for Magnus, taking control of the center. Of course, d4 and bishop c4 are the main lines against this e6 line in the Alapin. Now here, Jan does take on d4. C takes d4 is the move, and now c takes d4 is the main reply, but instead here, Magnus does go for a gambit line with the move bishop c4. Very interesting. Here, Magnus is literally begging black to take that pawn on c3. D takes c3. It's actually quite playable, but turns out it would give Magnus a huge initiative. The main line goes d takes c3, then bishop takes, e takes, and then knight takes c3. And with black's very weak pawn on d5 after e takes d5, white would have a very large initiative. So instead of d takes c3 here, black simply goes knight to b6, retreating the knight, getting out of the way of bishop takes d5 ideas and putting pressure on that bishop on c4 in return. Now, of course, the bishop must move. You must defend it. And here Magnus does go bishop b3, once again offering the gambit of the pawn. And this time, Jan does take it. He goes d takes c3, but real fast, that is not the right way to go here. Turns out that pawn is just too dangerous to be taken. Instead, d6 is the key move. Try to open up the center, intending e takes, then bishop takes, then short castles, and you would have a fine game as black. Instead here, d takes c3 played in the game. And this is going to give Magnus a massive initiative in this game. Don't try this one at home, folks. All right, knight takes c3. Magnus is officially down a pawn. Black has the extra pawn on the d-file. But of course, that pawn right now is hindering development of the queen side, especially that light squared bishop. So here, Jan, he does go d5, gaining space in the center and allowing the en passant move e takes d6 if white wants it. And here, Magnus, sure enough, he does take en passant. E takes d6. And again, if you're a beginner, whenever one side moves a pawn 2 squares forward, you can recapture on the diagonal if your pawn is next to the opponent's pawn. But you can only do it on the first move where the opponent moves the pawn 2 squares. So, e takes d6, recapturing en passant. Now we have bishop takes d6, recapturing the pawn and setting up short castles. So far, black is playing relatively solid, and he is up a pawn, that being the pawn on the e-file now. But of course, here, Magnus is going to have a huge initiative against the black king, mostly because this knight on b6 is not on f6. Normally, that knight is there defending the king side, but with that knight away from the defense of that side of the board, white is going to be able to get a huge initiative going. All right, now here, how should white continue with the attack? Well, in the game, Magnus does castles, short castles. However, I do want to point out there is the crazy idea of going knight g5 immediately, intending queen to h5, putting pressure on f7 and h7. And again, this idea of knight g5, then queen h5 is normally not an option, as again, normally that knight will be on f6. But here, with it on b6, where it doesn't control h5, that is actually an option. But instead, in the game, short castles played by Magnus, not a bad move at all. He is likely intending queen to e2, then rook to d1. That would be the most aggressive attacking setup. Of course, that rook on d1 would be opposing the black queen and the bishop on d6. He would have a lot of pressure on that d-file. All right, now here, black, knight to c6, developing the knight, a perfectly fine move. Magnus goes queen to e2. And here it turns out simply short castles is the right way forward for Jan. Of course, the king side would be very, very vulnerable. Again, without that knight on f6, black's king side will be very naked, but that is the right way to go. Instead here, h6 played, and I think Jan was concerned about the idea of either knight g5 or bishop g5. Of course, h6 does gain control of that g5 square, but now here Magnus, he turns to the heap with a series of very precise moves. starting with the move rook d1, getting the rook again on the open d file, opposing the bishop and the queen. How can Jan defend? Well, in the game, he does go queen to e7, getting his queen off that d file. Of course, instead of that, let's say black wastes a move. I don't know, he plays the move a6, something like that. Then after a6, knight to e4 would be just devastating, again, piling up pressure on the pin piece on d6. Therefore, queen d7, stepping out of the pin, is virtually mandatory here. All right, Magnus. Anyway, he does go knight d4, and now the benefit of queen e7 is the bishop can retreat either to c7 or b8. In the game, bishop c7 played by black. That is the right square for the bishop, keeping b8 open. That way the rook can enter the game on d8 later in the game. All right, now Magnus, he continues. Bishop e3, developing his bishop, getting more pressure, maybe intending rook to c1 ideas next. And now, Jan, how does he want to continue? Well, it turns out short castles is actually a little bit of a mistake. If you do that, and then, of course, bishop c5 will skewer the queen and the rook on the f8 square. That would be devastating. So with that in mind here, Jan, he goes knight to d7, and this move looks a little bit strange at first glance, but the idea is, number one, you are controlling c5. That does allow you to castle without losing the rook on f8 to bishop c5. And beyond that, that knight, it may be going to f6 later in the game. That would be a very good square for the knight defending the kingside. So knight d7, a decent move by Jan. But here, Magnus, he's got a beautiful tactical shot to seize the initiative. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the absolutely mind-blowing move for Magnus right here. And your one hit, Magnus could not find this move in this Blitz game. If you can find it, you found a move that even Magnus himself could not find. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos like this. All right, here, the key idea, believe it or not, you can actually sacrifice the rook. Rook takes d7, giving up the exchange. The point being, after bishop takes, then bishop to c5, you do gain control of the c5 square as that knight is no longer with us. Then after the queen move, say queen d8, you go rook d1, and despite being down the exchange, the pressure is just overwhelming. Beyond that, the computer also says g4 here, believe it or not, is a playable move, but I mean, that move is beyond me. Instead, in the game, rook a to c1 played by Magnus. A decent move, very fine in a blitz game, and here Jan does castle. Now again, according to the computer, g4 is playable, but instead, knight d4 played by Magnus, centralizing his knight and keeping the initiative going. All right, now here, of course, with that knight no longer on the f3 square, that means h4 is open, and sure enough, Jan, he flies in with the queen to h4, threatening queen takes h2, the audacity of, I believe he's a German grandmaster, or is he Polish? He's Polish, the audacity of the Polish grandmaster. All right, now here, Magnus, he defends, knight g3, jumping back with the knight, covering the h2 square against the Polish grandmaster, and now here, Jan, what's it going to be? Well, turns out he's got to find a very precise move right here, right now. For example, if he plays the move, I don't know, rook d8, a very logical looking move, then Magnus will have the exchange sacrifice once again. Rook takes c6. The point being, after b takes, then knight takes, you are hitting the rook, and the attack continues. So overall here, Jan, he's got to find a precise move. There are so many booby traps here if he doesn't play correctly. Now, in the game, he does go knight d to e5, centralizing his knight, bringing it over to the center of the board and closer to the king side. Now we have knight takes c6, and then here, Jan, he makes it the next critical mistake of the game. He actually takes back with the knight. Knight takes c6, but this is a mistake. Instead of that, you want to go b takes c6, if I can draw arrows correctly, recapturing with the pawn. That way you do keep that knight on e5 centralized and closer to the king side. Instead, in the game, knight takes c6 played, and this is a critical mistake. I mean, number one, the knight goes away from the center of the board. Number two, the c4 square is now available. Before, the knight did control it. Now it is not. And that means the move rook to c4, the rook lift, is playable. Magnus, the audacity, the rook lift on the fourth rank, hitting the queen. The queen has to move. Where is the queen going to go? Well, it turns out the queen, no matter where it goes, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. For example, if you go to queen to e7, then bishop c5 will hit the queen. If you go queen to f6, the other square, then knight to h5 also hits the queen, and the attack continues. So no matter what, you are in deep trouble as black. Now, the computer says you can actually sacrifice the queen here. Bishop takes g3, intending rook takes, then bishop takes. But instead of that, in the game, queen to e7 played by Jan. And of course, now, bishop c5 skewers the queen and the rook. This is where Magnus just slowly takes over in this game. All right, queen to e8 played. And you may think, okay, surely Magnus, he will win that rook on f8, right? Well, you thought wrong. Instead, knight to h5, a much stronger move. The point being, the rook, it is trapped. There is nowhere it can go. Even if black goes, say, I don't know, knight to e7, that would be incredibly passive. White would have too many attacking ideas. So with that in mind here, Jan, he does go f5, gaining space, giving the rook some loft on f7. Therefore, now bishop takes is forced, as if you don't take the rook, black will go rook f7, getting the king out of getting the rook out of harm's way. So now, bishop takes f8, then we have king takes f8, and now here, turns out, according to the engine, g4 is a playable move. In the spirit of the bishop g5 line of the Najdorf, there are certain lines in the poison pawn variation where white can actually play g4 in a scenario just like this one. But instead here, knight to f4 played in the game, jumping back with the knight. All right, now here, Jan, what's it going to be? Well, he has many different playable moves. None of them are super attractive. Maybe the most interesting one is g5, gaining space on the king side. Maybe Jan could make something on that side of the board. Beyond that, queen to f7 and a5 are also playable according to the engine. Now, instead of that here, b5 was played in the game, and this is just a fatal mistake. As you can see by the eval bar, skyrocketing on the left, it's already very high, and now it just goes stratospheric. What is the idea for white? Well, once again, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the key idea for Magnus right here in this position. And of course, he's going to sacrifice the rook. Rook takes c6, giving up the rook for the knight. And there's a very key tactical idea behind this exchange sacrifice. All right, black obviously will recapture with the queen. Queen takes c6. And now, what is the idea? Well, you start with the move bishop takes e6. And here, almost everything is booby-trapped. For example, if you take the bishop, bishop takes, then the line goes queen takes, knight takes, and at the end of this line, the knight forks the king on f8 and the bishop on c7. You do end up in the endgame up an entire knight. That is one of the ideas. Let's say instead you go queen to e8, retreating the queen, then simply queen to f3 hits the rook on a8. On the other hand, what about g5? The computer also says g5 might be playable. Well, if g5, queen to h5 infiltrates on the king side, threatening queen f7 checkmate in one move, that is no good as well. Instead, in the game, bishop takes f4 played, winning the so-called free bishop. But here, Magnus, of course, he's got an idea. Rook to d8 hits the king must move, king e7, and then rook takes c8, hitting both the rook and the queen. Of course, black is going to have to respond. He goes rook takes c8. But here is the key idea of the entire sequence, starting with the move 24, rook takes c4, or c6, sorry. The key move here is simply bishop d5 with the double attack on the king on e7 and the queen on c6. Of course, this is just devastating. Lots of blue arrows here. The king moves, then you take the queen on c6, bishop takes, then rook takes, and all of a sudden, Magnus finds himself in an endgame up the queen versus the bishop and the rook. And of course, that pawn on b5 will be falling as well. Jan-Krzysztof Duda is just a crook 10 here. All right, g3 drives back the bishop. Bishop b5, queen takes b5, rook to b6, defends the rook, but now it's simply queen d7, and Magnus Carlsen is in complete control here. All right, rook takes b2, then queen takes a7, wins that pawn. He now has, again, the queen and the pawn versus the rook and bishop. It is a matter of time here. All right, rook d2, queen b6, hits the king f7, then queen to a5, pressuring the bishop. Rook d1 hits the king g2, king to f6, then a4, starting the march of the alpha 0 a pawn down the board. Then we have bishop to d4, queen d8 hits the king g6, queen d6, king f7, then a5. Now, very importantly, the king on g2 is on a light square, and black has a dark squared bishop. If the king was on a dark square, or if black had a light squared bishop, then moving it to, say, I don't know, e4, check, would win the queen. But of course, that is not a possibility. Jan goes rook d2, but here, simply queen to f4. And in this position, Jan, he simply resigns to Magnus Carlsen. There is no stopping that pawn from marching down the board. He's going to lose sooner or later, so for that reason here, he just taps out. He has had enough. Wow, what a game between Magnus Carlsen and Jan-Krzysztof Duda in the semifinals of the 2024 World Blitz Championships. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, smash that like button. Comment down below what you thought of this game. By the way, comment down below what you guys think of Magnus and Jan Nepomniachtchi sharing the 2024 World Blitz Championship titles. Me, it's like both amazing and a disgrace at the exact same time. I don't even know how to feel about it. I have no idea how FIDE allowed it, but they did, and, you know, it happened. It sure does seem like Magnus can do literally whatever he wants these days, breaking whatever rules he wants, and organizers will never hold him accountable because he's literally Magnus, and he has, like, all the eyeballs in the chess world. But That is my take on that. A disgrace and amazing at the same time. I don't know how to feel about it, but let me know down below what you guys think. And, again, smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't. And I'll see you next time. Oh, by the way, check out this video right here, where I covered the best game from the finals of the 2024 World Blitz Championships between Magnus and the Russian Grandmaster Jan-Krzysztof Duda. If you haven't seen that game, it is incredible. There's a shocker finish to that game. So check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.